You sit at home, waiting for the phone to ring, hoping your children or grandchildren will call. You scroll through photos of family gatherings, noticing that they seem to happen less often. Conversations feel shorter, visits feel more distant, and deep down you can't help but wonder, are they pulling away? The truth is, relationships don't just fade overnight. It happens gradually, through small, unnoticed actions that slowly create distance. Many people unknowingly push their loved ones away, not because they don't care, but because they're stuck in habits that weaken family bonds. These habits seem harmless at first, but over time, they can turn into emotional barriers that make it harder for your family to stay close. Maybe you feel like they don't have time for you anymore, or that they don't make an effort the way they used to. But have you ever considered that something you're doing, without even realizing it, might be part of the reason? In this video, we're going to reveal 10 common mistakes that could be driving your family away, and, more importantly, what you can do to fix them before it's too late. If you want to strengthen your relationships and bring your loved ones closer, hit like and subscribe, because small changes today can save your most important connections tomorrow. You pick up the phone and call your child or grandchild. They answer, but the conversation feels short, almost distant. Maybe you start by asking how they're doing, but before long, you find yourself pointing out things they should do differently. The way they handle their finances, how they raise their kids, or how often they call you. You mean well, but have you ever considered that constant criticism might be pushing them away? No one enjoys feeling judged. Whether intentional or not, frequent negative comments can make loved ones feel like they're never doing enough. What might seem like harmless advice or constructive feedback to you can feel like constant disapproval to them. Over time, this can create emotional distance, making them hesitant to call, visit, or open up to you. One of the biggest dangers of habitual criticism is that it creates an environment where your family members feel defensive rather than supported. If every conversation includes a remark about what they could be doing better, whether it's their career, parenting style, lifestyle choices, or even their appearance, it starts to feel exhausting. No one wants to feel like they're under a microscope every time they talk to someone they love. And it's not just direct criticism that pushes people away. Even constant complaining or focusing only on the negatives in life can drain the energy out of a conversation. If every phone call turns into a list of grievances about health issues, politics, or disappointments, your loved ones may begin to associate talking to you with stress rather than comfort. They might start calling less often, keeping conversations short, or avoiding visits altogether. Not because they don't love you, but because they don't want to leave every interaction feeling worse than when they started. So, how can you shift from criticism to connection? It starts with awareness. Pay attention to how often you correct, advise, or complain during conversations. Instead of focusing on what's wrong, try highlighting what's right. Express appreciation for the things your family members do well, acknowledge their efforts, and find ways to build them up instead of tearing them down. If you feel the urge to correct something, ask yourself if it's truly necessary. Is it worth damaging the relationship over? Sometimes, the best way to stay close to your loved ones is to let them make their own choices, even if you don't always agree. Instead of saying, "You should be saving more money instead of spending on vacations," try, "That sounds like an amazing trip. What was your favorite part?" Shifting your conversations from criticism to curiosity can completely change the dynamic. When your family feels like you're genuinely interested in their lives, rather than trying to fix them, they'll be more eager to talk to you. And when they do, they won't feel the need to keep their guard up or prepare for judgment. At the end of the day, your words have power. They can either push your family away or bring them closer. The choice is yours. If this was an eye-opener for you, take a second to like and subscribe, because small changes in how we communicate can make all the difference in keeping our loved ones close. You sit down with your family, and before long, you find yourself reminiscing about the past, the way things used to be, how much better life was when you were younger, how different everything is now. You tell stories about your childhood, about the good old days, about how much the world has changed. But as you talk, You notice that your children or grandchildren seem distracted, looking at their phones, nodding absent-mindedly, or even subtly changing the subject. Why does it feel like they're pulling away? Nostalgia is a powerful thing. It connects us to our history, reminds us of who we are, and keeps cherished memories alive. But when conversations become entirely focused on the past, it can create an emotional distance between generations. Instead of drawing family members closer, it can make them feel like they're stuck in a conversation that doesn't include them. You might not even realize you're doing it. It's natural to talk about the experiences that shaped you, to compare the past to the present, and to share stories from your life. But when every conversation revolves around how things used to be, how different parenting was, how music was better, how kids today don't understand real work, it can make younger generations feel like their experiences are being dismissed. Imagine being in their shoes. If every time they talk to you, they hear about how much better things were back then, it can feel like their present lives don't measure up. They might start avoiding deeper conversations because they don't want to be compared to the past or feel like they're constantly being reminded that they're growing up in a world that's worse than the one you lived in. But it's not just about making them feel unheard, it's also about missing out on the present. When you focus too much on the past, you risk disconnecting from what's happening in your family's lives right now. You might not know what your grandchildren's interests are, what challenges your children are facing, or what's truly going on in their day-to-day world. If they feel like every conversation turns into a history lesson, they may stop opening up to you about their own lives. So how do you find balance? The key is to make conversations a two-way street. Instead of only telling stories about the past, ask about what's happening in their world today. What are they excited about? What's stressing them out? What are their dreams, struggles, or passions? Showing genuine curiosity about their lives helps build a deeper connection and makes them feel valued in the present. And when you do share stories from the past, frame them in a way that bridges the gap between generations. Instead of saying, "Back in my day, we didn't have all these distractions like phones and social media," try, "I'm curious, what do you think is the hardest part about growing up with so much technology?" This turns the conversation into a discussion rather than a one-sided comparison. The past is important, but so is the present. Your family wants to share their lives with you, not just listen to what life was like decades ago. By balancing nostalgia with engagement in today's world, you create an environment where they feel heard, understood, and eager to spend more time with you. So let me ask you, do you think nostalgia has ever created distance between you and your family? Drop a comment below, and let's talk about how we can keep our connections strong, no matter the generation gap. You love your family. You want the best for them. You've lived through experiences, learned hard lessons, and you don't want them to make the same mistakes you did. So you offer advice, sometimes without being asked. You check in frequently, ask detailed questions, and try to guide them toward what you believe are the best choices. But what if, instead of feeling supported, they feel controlled? One of the most common reasons family members pull away is a lack of respect for personal boundaries. You might not see it that way. After all, what's wrong with giving advice, asking questions, or wanting to stay involved? But to your children or grandchildren, these actions can feel invasive, overwhelming, or even suffocating. Boundaries are the invisible lines that separate one person's independence from another's influence. When these lines are crossed too often, relationships suffer. It's not about shutting people out. It's about recognizing where love and care end and where personal autonomy begins. One of the biggest mistakes people make is offering unsolicited advice too often. You might think you're just being helpful, but constantly suggesting how someone should live their life, whether it's about parenting, career choices, or even how they spend their free time, can feel like a lack of trust. Instead of feeling supported, your family members may feel as if their decisions are never good enough, as if they always need to justify themselves, or as if they can't have a conversation without it turning into a lecture. Another common issue? Asking too many personal questions. It might come from a place of love, but pressing too much, about relationships, finances, or private matters can make people feel like their independence isn't respected. When they hesitate to answer or give vague responses, it's often not because they have something to hide. It's because they're trying to protect their sense of personal space. And then there's the struggle with letting go. If you've been heavily involved in your children's or grandchildren's lives for years, it can be difficult to accept when they need space to make their own choices. But the reality is, as people grow, they need to establish their own ways of living, even if those choices are different from yours. So how do you show love and support without crossing boundaries? The key is to shift from control to empowerment. Instead of offering unsolicited advice, wait until they ask. Instead of pressing for details, let them share what they're comfortable with. And most importantly, acknowledge that their choices, even if they're not the ones you would make, are still valid. A great way to start respecting boundaries is by asking, "Would you like my advice on this? Or would you rather I just listen?" This small shift shows that you respect their independence and gives them control over the conversation. It allows them to seek guidance when they need it, without feeling like they're being told what to do. At the end of the day, the relationships that last are the ones built on mutual respect. Your family isn't pulling away because they don't love you. They're pulling away because they need space to be their own people. The best thing you can do? Support them in a way that makes them feel valued, not controlled. If this resonated with you, take a second to like and subscribe, because sometimes the best way to keep your family close is by giving them the space they need. The phone rings, you pick up, and on the other end, a familiar voice greets you. At first, it seems like they're just calling to check in, but within minutes, you realize there's a reason for the call. They need something. Maybe it's a favor, advice, or help with a problem. And when the conversation is over, you can't help but wonder, would they have called if they didn't need anything? Relationships that are built only on requests and favors don't last. Over time, they begin to feel transactional, like a service rather than a genuine connection. No one likes feeling as if they're only being contacted when it's convenient for the other person. Yet, this is one of the most common ways family members unintentionally push each other away. At first, it doesn't seem like a big deal. "I'm just busy," you might tell yourself. "They know I care." But from the other person's perspective, it starts to feel like the relationship only exists when there's something to be gained. If months go by without a simple, "How have you been?" it becomes harder and harder to maintain a real emotional bond. The strongest family relationships are built on mutual care and interest, not just need. If you want to keep your family close, the key is to engage in their lives without expecting anything in return. Ask about their day, their challenges, their victories. Show up for them, even when you don't need anything. Because when the only time you call is when you want something, eventually they'll stop picking up. So how do you change this? Start making small, intentional efforts to connect. Instead of calling with a request, call just to say hello. Instead of waiting until you need help with something, reach out and check in first. If your children or grandchildren feel like every conversation comes with an obligation, they'll begin to associate your calls with stress instead of warmth. If you struggle to know what to say, start with something simple. "I was just thinking about you today and wanted to see how you were doing." This one sentence can change the entire dynamic of your relationship. It tells the other person that you value them, that you care about them as a person, not just for what they can do for you. Another way to strengthen connections: listen more than you speak. If you always steer conversations toward your needs, your thoughts, or your experiences, it doesn't give the other person space to feel heard. Instead, ask open-ended questions. What's been exciting in your life lately? Or what's something you're looking forward to? Showing interest in their world makes them want to share more with you. And if it's been a long time since you reached out, it's never too late to reconnect. A simple message, a thoughtful note, or even just an unexpected call can start rebuilding a connection that may have faded over time. The key is consistency. Relationships don't grow from one conversation. They grow from regular, meaningful interactions. So ask yourself, when was the last time you reached out to a family member just to check in? If the answer is too long ago, today is the perfect time to change that. Drop a comment below. What's one small way you plan to strengthen your family relationships this week? You pick up the phone, start talking, and before you know it, you've spent most of the conversation venting about your health, about the world, about how things just aren't the way they used to be. You're not trying to be negative, you just want to express how you feel. But after the call ends, there's a lingering feeling that the conversation wasn't as enjoyable as it could have been. And over time, you start noticing that people call less often, visit less frequently, and seem to keep their distance. No one enjoys being around constant negativity. It's emotionally draining, and when every conversation revolves around problems, complaints, or past regrets, it becomes harder for people to look forward to talking to you. They may still love you, but they start associating interactions with stress rather than warmth. And when that happens, they slowly begin to pull away. You might not even realize how often negativity slips into your conversations. Complaints about your health, criticisms of family decisions, frustration with the younger generation, fears about the future. All of these can create an emotional weight that makes conversations feel more like an obligation than an enjoyable exchange. It's not that your problems don't matter, they do. But when negativity dominates every interaction, it drowns out the opportunity for connection, joy, and shared happiness. People naturally gravitate toward those who make them feel good. If every conversation with you feels heavy, stressful, or exhausting, your family and friends may start limiting the time they spend with you. And the worst part? You might not even realize it's happening until the distance has already formed. But here's the good news. This can change. Just as negativity can push people away, positivity can draw them back in. Learning to shift your focus in conversations can completely transform the way your family engages with you. Start by being mindful of what you talk about. Ask yourself, if I were on the other end of this conversation, would I enjoy it? This doesn't mean ignoring real concerns. It means balancing them with gratitude, humor, and genuine curiosity about the lives of others. One simple way to change your energy? Practice appreciation. Instead of saying, I never hear from you anymore, try, it's so nice to talk to you today, I've missed this. Instead of complaining about your health, try, I had a rough week, but I'm looking forward to the weekend. What about you? These small shifts change the tone of the conversation, making it more inviting and warm. Another way to bring positive energy into your relationships? Celebrate others. Ask about their interests, acknowledge their achievements, and show genuine enthusiasm for what's happening in their lives. When people feel valued and uplifted in conversations, they naturally want to come back for more. And if you do need to talk about something difficult, try to balance it with something light or hopeful. Share a problem, but also share something good that happened that day. The goal isn't to suppress real emotions, but to ensure that conversations aren't weighed down entirely by negativity. At the end of the day, people remember how you make them feel. If your presence brings warmth, laughter, and encouragement, your family will seek out your company. But if every conversation feels like an emotional burden, they will, even unconsciously, begin to avoid it. The choice is yours. Will you be the person who lifts others up, or the person who unknowingly pushes them away? If this resonated with you, take a second to like and subscribe, because small changes in how you communicate can create big changes in the relationships that matter most. The phone rings, and your child or grandchild finally answers. Instead of feeling happy to hear their voice, you immediately say, "Oh, so you finally remembered me." Or maybe you send a message that reads, "I guess you're too busy for me these days." You don't mean to be hurtful. You just want them to know that you miss them. But what if I told you that these guilt-inducing comments are actually driving them further away? No one likes feeling emotionally manipulated. Even if the guilt trip is subtle, it creates a sense of obligation rather than genuine connection. Instead of making loved ones want to call more often, it makes them dread conversations because they anticipate feeling bad about not being there enough. Over time, this cycle leads to shorter calls, fewer visits, and an emotional distance that is hard to bridge. At its core, guilt tripping is an attempt to control someone else's behavior. to make them feel bad enough that they'll do what you want. But while guilt may work in the short term, it doesn't build strong, healthy relationships. Instead of reaching out because they genuinely want to, your family may start calling only out of obligation, which means those interactions will feel less meaningful and more forced. So why do people guilt trip? Often, it comes from a place of loneliness, longing, or feeling unimportant. You might truly feel neglected, and guilt becomes a way to express that hurt. But the problem is that instead of deepening your bond, it creates resentment. Your loved ones don't leave those conversations feeling connected. They leave feeling weighed down, guilty, and ironically, less likely to reach out again. If you've ever said things like, "I guess I don't matter anymore. I suppose I'll just sit here alone as usual. If you really cared, you'd visit more often," then you may be unknowingly pushing your family away. Even though you're trying to express your feelings, these comments make conversations feel like emotional minefields. No one wants to engage in a relationship where they always feel like they're failing. So how do you change this dynamic? The key is shifting from guilt to gratitude. Instead of making your loved ones feel bad for not being around, make them feel good when they are. If your grandchild finally calls, don't start with, "Oh, I thought you forgot about me." Instead say, "I'm so happy to hear from you. Tell me what's new in your life." When you create a positive, uplifting atmosphere, your family will naturally want to be around you more. They'll associate conversations with warmth, not pressure. And instead of calling just to avoid feeling guilty, they'll call because they genuinely want to. Another important step? Finding fulfillment outside of family interactions. If your entire sense of happiness depends on how often your children or grandchildren call, you'll naturally put pressure on them to fill that emotional void. But when you cultivate your own interests, friendships, and routines, you take that pressure off them, allowing relationships to flourish naturally rather than out of guilt. At the end of the day, people are drawn to those who make them feel appreciated, not those who make them feel inadequate. If you replace guilt with gratitude, criticism with kindness, and pressure with understanding, you'll notice that your family starts reaching out more. Not because they feel obligated, but because they truly want to. So, let me ask you, have you ever felt guilted into a conversation? Or have you ever accidentally guilt-tripped a loved one? Drop a comment below and let's talk about how we can build relationships based on love, not obligation. You sit across from your grandchild, trying to have a conversation, but something feels off. They're distracted, glancing at their phone, nodding absent-mindedly. When you ask them about their life, their interests, their friends, the answers are short, vague. It feels like they're in a different world, one you don't understand. And maybe you don't. Many people wonder why their relationships with younger family members feel distant, but few stop to ask themselves a crucial question. Have I made an effort to connect with their world? The generation gap isn't just about age, it's about interest, effort, and willingness to adapt. The world is constantly changing, and with it, the way people communicate, socialize, and engage with life. When one side refuses to bridge the gap, the distance grows. It's not intentional, it just happens. And before you know it, conversations feel forced, visits become less frequent, and your family moves forward while you feel left behind. One of the biggest mistakes older generations make is assuming that the way they grew up is the right way. They dismiss new trends, technologies, or ways of thinking as silly, unnecessary, or even harmful. But when you reject the interests of younger family members, you're also rejecting a part of who they are. Imagine if, when you were young, your parents had refused to understand the music you loved, the books you read, or the way you saw the world. That's how younger generations feel when their experiences are brushed off as meaningless. Technology is a major example. For many younger people, phones, social media, and online spaces aren't just distractions. They're a central part of how they communicate and stay connected. If you don't understand how they use these tools, you risk becoming an outsider in their lives. You don't have to love social media, but dismissing it entirely is like refusing to learn the language your family speaks. Then there are the cultural shifts. Ideas about work, relationships, gender roles, and social norms have evolved. Clinging to the idea that things were better back then makes it harder to relate to younger generations. You don't have to agree with everything they believe, but being open to understanding their perspective can mean the difference between a strong connection and growing distance. So how do you close the gap? Start by showing genuine curiosity. Ask your grandchildren about their favorite shows, their hobbies, their opinions on current events, not in a judgmental way, but out of a real desire to understand. If they see that you're willing to engage with their world, they'll be far more likely to engage with yours. And when it comes to technology, learn the basics. If your family spends time on social media, ask them to show you how it works. If they use messaging apps, make an effort to text them once in a while. If they love video games, music, or movies you don't recognize, ask them about it. You don't have to become an expert. Just showing interest is enough to keep the door open. At the same time, invite them into your world too. Share your own interests in a way that makes them feel included. If you love gardening, invite them to plant something with you. If you enjoy cooking, teach them a family recipe. Relationships are built on shared experiences, and the more you create together, the stronger your bond will be. Change isn't easy, but refusing to adapt leads to isolation. The world moves forward, with or without you, and the people who stay connected are the ones who embrace learning, growth, and new ways of thinking. You can either hold on to the past and watch your family drift away, or you can step forward and meet them where they are. The choice is yours. If this made you think, take a second to like and subscribe, because building strong family connections starts with making an effort to understand. You love your family. You care about them deeply. But when was the last time you told them? Not just in passing, not just assuming they know, but actually, sincerely expressing your appreciation for them. Gratitude is one of the most powerful tools for maintaining strong relationships, yet it's often the most overlooked. Many people assume that their love and appreciation are understood, that words aren't necessary, that their actions speak for themselves. But over time, when appreciation isn't expressed, relationships weaken. Family members may start feeling taken for granted, undervalued, or even unnoticed. And that's when distance begins to form. Not because of conflict, but because of a quiet erosion of connection. Think about it. Would you feel excited to spend time with someone who never acknowledges your efforts? When people feel like their presence doesn't matter, that their kindness, time, and sacrifices go unrecognized, they naturally withdraw. They may still care, but without appreciation, the effort in a relationship starts to feel one-sided. And it's not just about big gestures. Small, everyday moments of gratitude can completely transform the way your loved ones feel around you. A simple, "I appreciate you. Thank you for calling. It means a lot that you took the time to visit," can make someone feel valued and eager to stay close. But many people fall into the trap of only noticing what's wrong rather than what's right. It's easy to focus on what family members don't do, how often they forget to call, how they make choices you don't agree with, how things aren't the way they used to be. But constantly pointing out what's lacking, instead of recognizing what they do give, creates an emotional distance. Imagine this. A grandchild finally calls after a long time, excited to talk. Instead of hearing, "It's so good to hear from you," they hear, "Well, it's about time." Instead of feeling welcomed, they feel guilty. Instead of being encouraged to call more often, they feel discouraged. The result? They start calling less, not more. On the other hand, imagine how much more often your family would reach out if they felt genuinely appreciated every time they did. If every visit, call, or message was met with warmth, gratitude, and happiness, they would associate being around you with positive emotions, not obligation. So how do you change this? Start small. Each day, make it a habit to express appreciation to your children, your grandchildren, your spouse, your friends. Notice the little things. Did someone call you? Thank them for taking the time. Did someone help you with a chore? Send you a message, invite you somewhere? Let them know you appreciate it. And if you feel like relationships in your life have become distant, ask yourself, have I been showing gratitude, or have I been focused on what's missing? A simple shift in attitude could be the key to bringing your loved ones closer again. So, let me ask you, when was the last time you told someone in your family how much you appreciate them. Drop a comment below, and let's start making gratitude a habit that strengthens relationships rather than letting distance grow in its absence. You've lived a long life. You've seen the world change, watched society shift, and developed strong beliefs based on years of experience. You know what works, what doesn't, and what's worth fighting for. But what if, without even realizing it, your refusal to adapt is pushing your loved ones away? Change is uncomfortable. It challenges what we know, forces us to question old habits, and requires effort. But refusing to change, whether it's in the way you communicate, the way you approach family dynamics, or even the way you view the world, can slowly create an emotional gap between you and the people you love. At first, it's subtle. Your children or grandchildren stop sharing things with you because they know you won't approve. Conversations become shorter because they don't want to hear another lecture about how things used to be better. Family visits feel more like an obligation than a joyful experience, because they know every interaction will turn into a battle of opinions rather than a moment of connection. And the worst part? You might not even realize it's happening. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming that because they've always done something a certain way, it must be the right way. But life doesn't work like that. Every generation faces new challenges, discovers new ways of thinking, and adapts to a world that is constantly evolving. If you refuse to evolve with it, you risk becoming stuck in a mindset that alienates you from the very people you care about. Think about it. Have you ever dismissed your children's or grandchildren's opinions because they don't know what they're talking about? Have you ever refused to learn about new technology, new ways of parenting, or new perspectives because you believe your way was better? This kind of stubbornness doesn't just create disagreements, it creates walls. Your family stops including you in conversations about their struggles, their passions, their dreams, because they feel you won't understand. Or worse, that you'll judge them. And slowly, without meaning to, they drift further away. But here's the truth. It's never too late to change. You don't have to abandon your values or pretend to like things you don't. But if you want to maintain deep, meaningful relationships with your family, you have to be willing to listen, to adapt, and to meet them where they are. That means asking questions instead of making assumptions. It means choosing curiosity over criticism. It means embracing the fact that just because something is different doesn't mean it's wrong. Because at the end of the day, what matters more, being right or being close to the people you love?